Hello, my name is Jonathan Lim. I'm the project co-lead to Just Add Astra. As part of the 2021 Australian Space Biology and Health Summit, I'll be speaking about the relevance of a human rights perspective across human spaceflight activities. This follows the interdependence between individual health, safety, and dignity, vis-a-vis the unique environmental conditions and challenges of space upon the human body, and developing academic dialogue on the intersections between international human rights law, IHRL, and international space law, ISL, regarding the future of humanity across the final frontier. Driving the integration of human rights across human spaceflight activities will facilitate the adoption of individually focused safeguards, advance sustainable development, and promote a more equitable outer space environment based on consultation and common consensus. Human rights represent standards that recognize and protect the dignity of all human beings. These rights reflect the minimum standards required for people to live with dignity, satisfy their basic needs, and to take full advantage of all opportunities. Human rights broadly encompass the following principles. Firstly, universality of such rights. All people everywhere in the world are entitled to them. Second, all human rights are indivisible. The deprivation of one right adversely affects the others. Third, the fulfillment of one right often depends wholly or in part upon fulfillment of others. Fourth, all persons and institutions are accountable to just, fair, and equitable laws. Fifth, people have the right to participate in and access information regarding decision-making processes which affect their lives. And finally, states and other duty bearers are answerable for the observance of human rights, bearing the responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights obligations. So the formation and enforcement of these rights are contingent upon an established framework, codified through a series of international agreements at the UN level. This includes a collection of foundational documents under the International Bill of Rights, which includes the UDHR, ICCPR, and ICESCR. Now, these IHRL instruments outline the duty and obligation of governments and policymakers to refrain from interfering with or curtailing the enjoyment of human rights, to proactively protect individuals and groups from rights abuses, and to take positive actions to facilitate the enjoyment of basic rights. While human rights have been largely codified within international agreements, there also exists customary international law, general principles, and other sources of authority supporting the development and realization of novel rights within international law jurisprudence and state practice. Additionally, various international space-related agreements provide opportunities for states to interpret and elicit the existence of IHRL values and principles within international space law jurisprudence. This extraterritorial extension of international law is highlighted through, firstly, Article 3 of the Outer Space Treaty, specifying that its activities conducted by a state must be carried out in accordance with international law, including the UN Charter. Therefore, in whatever activity a state undertakes in space, such must be in accordance with the international law relevant and applicable. This challenges state parties to therefore rationally establish which aspects of international law apply into international space context under the Outer Space Treaty. Second, Article 2 of the 1979 Moon Agreement specifies that all activities on the Moon shall be carried out in accordance with international law, including the UN Charter. And finally, in addressing the activities of non-state actors, Article 2 of the 1972 Liability Convention holds launching states absolutely liable to compensate for damages caused by their space objects, including damages wrought by non-state actors under their jurisdiction. The intersection between human rights and outer space is interpretable, therefore, through two perspectives. Firstly, the use of outer space applications to support monitoring, enforcement, and realization of human rights terrestrially. Satellite and Earth observation technologies assist policymakers in comprehending trends, evaluating needs, and creating sustainable development policies in the collective interest. Second, the extension of terrestrial human rights into the domain of outer space affairs. And it is this second intersection which proves relevant to our concerns regarding the impact of gravity upon human activities in space and on other celestial bodies, both presently and in the near future. Summarizing the specific health-related risks of space, prolonged activities and presence in outer space can have a deteriorating effect upon human health. The importance of understanding and safeguarding against the effects of space environment is further elevated as astronauts increasingly transition from low Earth orbit missions to deep space destinations. Consequently, NASA has summarized 5 specific human spaceflight hazards related to the stresses of space activities on the human body, including radiation, isolation and confinement, distance from the Earth, gravity fields, and hostile/closed environments, thereafter referred to as RIDGE. Focusing specifically on the risks of gravity, the effects of deviations between high, low, and microgravity environments in space and upon other celestial bodies can be divided into 2 respects. Firstly, concerning gravity and physical health, transitions between different gravity environments can affect spatial orientation, head and hand-eye coordination, balance, locomotion, and may induce space motion sickness. This is reinforced by the long-term health effects of gravity, including upon human development, such as the loss of bone and muscle mass, vision impairment, and dehydration and kidney damage. Second, concerning gravity and mental health, there exists the risk of adverse cognitive or behavioral conditions and psychiatric disorders as attributed to the effects of gravity on the human body. This is highlighted where change in motor controlling by gravity can contribute to attention deficit conditions, interfere with sleep architecture via fluid shifts, impede the effectiveness of antidepressants or psychotropics, antipsychotics, impair learning, and to negatively affect memory and cognitive processes. So acknowledging the health-related risks of gravity, the relevance of health-based human rights measures is premised on the interconnected nature of human rights. Falling under the extraterritorial extension of human rights across space activities, the application of a human rights-based approach highlights the essentiality of several rights in supporting dedicated policies to address the effects of diverse gravity environments upon the human body. A feasible human rights framework recognizing the need for gravity-related protections must thus be founded upon the interdependence between RTH and RHE as core concerns, and thereafter reinforced via RTL. So RTH is the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, where health is a fundamental human rights concern, indispensable for the exercise of other human rights. Every human being is entitled to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standards of health conducive to living a life in dignity. This is highlighted under Article 25 of the UDHR, emphasizing the right of everyone to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of themselves. And this is further reinforced by Article 12 of the ICE SCR, where everyone has the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And this is evidenced most recently through UNUSA's ongoing initiative to realize the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 3 regarding health. And in this context, RTH may encompass the following concerns, such as access to information on the health and well-being of families, access to health facilities, access to private health insurance, and monitoring factors that affect human health and well-being, such as, say, air quality. And in the outer space context, the failure of state to supply health-related goods and services or anticipate health issues tied to the varying effects of gravity may thus be construed as a human rights violation or failure. Consequently, there exists clear precedent for human rights protections which have arisen from environmental factors. This follows the recognized right to clean air, premised upon the potentially adverse effects of polluted air upon human health and well-being. So given the inherent adverse impact of improper gravity environments upon the human body, RTH conceivably provides a means for rights advocates and states to anticipate future health-based challenges and risks. Concerning RHE, the intersection between human rights and the environment is encompassed under the evolving right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And without a healthy environment, we are unable to fulfill our aspirations or even live at a level commensurate with minimum standards of human dignity. RHE is inferred from a collection of common law sources and IHR instruments. Under the UADHR, this is relevant per Article 3, and regarding the right to life, and Article 25 regarding the right to a standard of living adequate for human health and well-being. And this bears relevance across a variety of human spaceflight activities, for example, where the lack of adequate environmental protections creates space debris, or toxic pollutants arising from the improper disposal of chemical, biological, or radiological elements in space. So in outer space, the failure of a state to provide and maintain a healthy environment in terms of, say, a habitable degree of a standard 1G gravity may therefore be construed as a human rights violation or failure. Where about 101 states have since incorporated RHE within their national legislative instruments, there exists widespread support for responsible environmental norms in support of human rights. Asserting the importance of human health, dignity, and safety as tied to environmental conditions thus supports proactive measures to address the potentially hazardous impacts of different gravity environments. This is reinforced through the precautionary principle, an international environmental law principle which supports proactive environmental action in advance of any definitive scientific proof of a risk. And finally, concerning RTL, states bear the obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill RTL per Article 3 of the UDHR. RTL provides for the positive duty to protect life and a negative obligation to refrain from violating this right. States must also undertake appropriate and proactive measures to prevent harm from private entities. And across human spaceflight activities, there are many circumstances which present a clear and present threat to an individual's life and RTL. Including the failure to provide an astronaut or space vehicle with sufficient oxygen or water, or inadequate safety protections by space launch providers. In the outer space context as well, the failure of a state to therefore take adequate safety measures and anticipate the health-related risks of different gravity environments, or of frequent transitions between such environments, may therefore arguably constitute a human rights violation or failure. Authorities must therefore take active and result-oriented steps to preclude harms from and to astronauts and human spaceflight participants. This may involve uniform safety standards and mechanisms, and ensuring the availability, accessibility, and affordability of elements essential to sustaining life in space. And tied to this, clarifying the normative content of social rights under IHRL informs the identification of key characteristics that relevant goods or services must present in operationalizing and extending these several human rights principles extraterritorially. Governments and stakeholders must therefore satisfy the 3 A's. Regarding availability, there must be enough of the good or service in relation to the needs of the populace or the individual. Regarding adequacy, the good or service must present certain essential qualities. And finally, concerning accessibility, the good or service should be accessible to all without discrimination. And establishing these 3 A's clarifies the content of the duty of states to provide such goods and services considered essential for the enjoyment of basic human rights. Now, regarding human spaceflight activities, the benefits of human rights in promoting a sustainable and healthy gravity environment can be viewed through several perspectives. Firstly, human rights ensure that every person's need to access elements central to leading a healthy and active life are provided and protected. This guarantees a baseline level of dignity and existence across various gravity environments, conducive to security, social harmony, and prosperity. Second, human rights protect the environment by encouraging sustainable practices, thereby promoting responsible decisions and encouraging a sense of responsibility and showing respect for the environment. Third, human rights promote and safeguard civil and political freedoms, including freedom of speech, expression, religion, and so forth. Now, these concerns may arise where citizens may seek to hold governments accountable for human rights violations or failure regarding their promises and their obligations to address the risks of gravity to human rights. And fourth, human rights provide a universal standard for holding governments accountable both to each other and to their citizens, promoting the rule of law. So taking steps to enshrine and enforce specific human rights protections related to gravity and health in the outer space context may be achieved through the following affirmative measures. Firstly, addressing the practice of private spaceflight organizations. The UN Global Compact provides for 10 guiding principles for businesses to adopt sustainable and socially responsible policies. This is further reinforced by the 2011 adoption of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Second, support for international environmental law principles, including the recognition of no harm rule and the precautionary principle as basic prescription. This is recognized under Principle 6 of the 1992 Rio Declaration, where states bear the duty to avoid activities in their territory causing significant damage to the environment of other states or areas beyond the limits of their national jurisdiction. Third, advocacy for increased discussion on human rights issues within the space community may be pursued through the formation of a UN subcommittee or within the health community under the WHO through a dedicated working group on human rights issues in the outer space context. And fourth, engagement and dialogue with UN human rights functions. This includes with the associated human rights special rapporteurs across each individual rights category, and directly with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It is thus hoped that the existing recognition of the health-related risks posed by different gravity environments in space will incite international dialogue and action by states concerning the need for human rights protections in support of human health, safety, and dignity across the final frontier. So that marks the end of the presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.